Hey everyone, welcome back to another business analysis video. In today's video, we'll be looking at how to write effective user stories for business analysts. If you're a business analyst or you're involved in Agile project, you know how crucial it is to have a well-written user story. Let's look at components, dive straight into it. Look at components of a user story. A user story typically follows the format as a type of user. I want an action so that a benefit or a value. This is in bracket, by the way. So it's a simple yet powerful way to capture your product requirements. Equally important to the user story is the acceptance criteria, which clearly defines when a user story is considered done. It's a checklist for your development team, and they really appreciate having this. If you want to know more about Epic user story acceptance criteria, click the link here. I have an existing video which also teaches you how to use Jira within Agile environments. So in order to determine a good user story, remember the acronym INVEST, INVEST. Good user stories are independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. So a good user story will have all these qualities. So let's look at an example of a bad user story. A bad user story is we need a login system. Full stop. That doesn't really tell you who needs the login system. What do they need the login system for? Or why do they need the login system? Let's represent it as a good user story. Here it is. As a user, I want to securely log in so that I can access my personal dashboard. Simple. Okay, so that's one example of a good user story. But going back to invest principle, let me explain to you what each of those letters in the acronym mean and give you some examples of what each of those represent. The first one, which is I, independent. Each user story needs to be able to stand on its own and it shouldn't depend on another user story. This will allow that user story to be developed, to be prioritized, and to be possibly delivered independently. An example of a user story that is not independent could be, as a user, I want to reset my password and log in so that I can access my profile, right? You can see that that want has two requirements in there: reset password and login to the system. Those are two requirements. They're not independent user stories, so we need to split them. We need to split that one user story into two user stories to make them independent. So an example of the independent user story is, as a user, I want to reset my password. That's it. So that I can access my account. Splitting the other part, which is to view profile. As a user, I want to view my profile within my dashboard so that I can access my personal details, for example. So that's what independent user story is. Now, next we have the N, which stands for negotiable, right? This means that the details of a user story can be negotiated between the dev team and the stakeholders. It's a conversation starter just to negotiate what can we do, what can't we do with this user story. It provides a high level understanding, and it would generally allow the fleshing out of the details in time for development. So let's look at an example of a negotiable user story. So an example of a negotiable user story is, as a user, I want a clearly visible login button. We want a clearly visible one so that I can easily proceed to my account. I haven't prescribed anything. So a non-negotiable user story would be, for example, as a user, I want a blue login button below the password field, and it should have 200 pixels, right? You have prescribed it and just told them exactly what it is without allowing room for negotiation. So that's a user story that is non-negotiable. We need to make sure that the user stories are negotiable. Now the third one, which is the V, which stands for valuable. Every user story should have value. It should provide some sort of value to the end user or to the customers? If it doesn't, then why exactly are we considering this requirement? As a business analyst, you always want to ask who benefits from these requirements and how do they benefit from it. And in effect, your user story should have a so that, should have a reason. The fourth one, which is the E, which stands for estimable, is very crucial for planning. The dev team should be able to estimate the size or the effort of that user story. If they're not able to estimate it, that means that the user story might be too vague. You haven't really specified exactly what this user wants. It might be too large, meaning there might be too many ands in the user story. It's not split. So how do they estimate? And then meaning it needs to be broken down or clarified from stakeholders. Shall we look at an example of estimable? So one example of a user story that is non-estimable, which is vague, could be, as a user, I want a better user interface. What does that mean? It's too vague and it's difficult for the team to estimate the user story. Now, a good one would be, as a user, I want the ability to change the theme of my dashboard so that I can customize its appearance. It still looks at user interface, user experience. The dev team are able to estimate how long it would take within our sprint planning to deliver that requirement. Now, the fifth one, which is small, can be quite similar to the estimable because we want to make sure our user story is small enough to be developed within one sprint. It shouldn't take more than, let's say our sprint is 2 weeks. You don't want to have one user story that will take 4 weeks to develop. So we want it to be small enough to be able to deliver it within that one sprint. If it's too large, that means it's not a user story, it's an epic that you then need to split to make sure it's in to make sure it has your INVE, right? So you need to make sure it's broken down into smaller manageable stories. We have our final letter, the T, which stands for testable. Every user story should have a clear acceptance criteria. Like I mentioned, if you want to know how to write acceptance criteria, click on the link to watch the other video that I already have existing. The acceptance criteria allows your user story to be tested. If you can't test it, how will you know that it's done? How will you know that it's complete? So example is, as a user, I want to reset my password so that I can regain access if I forget it. Why do you want? So that I can regain access. It makes it testable. The acceptance criteria for this user story could be the system sends a reset link to the registered email address. So if I click to reset my password, it should send me a link to be able to reset it. That will consider that requirement as done. As a business analyst, crafting your user stories following the INVEST principles ensure that they are well defined, ensures that they are manageable, and ensures that they are deliverable. And it also bridges the gap between the non-technical team, your non-technical stakeholders, and your developers, so that it ensures that everyone is on the same page and also ensures that the project moves smoothly. If you'd like to know more about how to write effective user stories using the INVEST method and various other methods together with real life project examples, click the link below to have access to my ebook on how to write effective user stories for business analysts. That's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this content. You never know who it might help. And as always, I'll see you in my next one. Peace.